Welcome to the first session of the HRR course, Just Like at Google. Today we're going to talk about how Google finds and attracts talent. This is our first lesson of the course. It's traditionally held in an open format with everyone welcome to attend. I'll tell you a bit about this course called HR at Google. In this course, we explore Google's best practices. I'll explain why I chose Google a little later. We look at how the company handles employee recruitment, onboarding, performance management, evaluations, compensation, and many other practices. So we're examining real examples of how this company deals with these issues. Why is this necessary? Based on the Google examples we'll explore, you can improve your own company's performance. And as you'll see today, the tools that Google uses are actually available to any company. This course has a website that looks like this. I'll tell you a bit about myself and then share my observations about Google. That's what I'll call it. My name is Mike Pritula. My first job was at Alpha Bank. It's a bank now. That's where I was a recruiter coach and where I first learned about Google as an employer. This was in 2008, although Google had been talked about before and some articles had come out. In 2008, photos of their magical office went viral on the internet, but more on that later. Then I worked at the STB Starlight Media TV channel where I tried to implement similar practices that I had observed at Google in the TV station company. I'll show you some photos too. After that, I went to work for Wargaming. I can say that Wargaming and Google have a lot in common in many ways, including the office, various practices, and overall approach. While working in gaming, I was first introduced to the OKR system, which Google had been using for years, and saw how powerful this practice was. By this time in 2015, I realized that you can really learn a lot from Google, as they truly implement best practices. Around the same time in 2015, a book came out by Laszlo Bock, Google's former HR director, which I devoured. I first read it in the original English, then read it again when the translation came out. I really liked it and found it very relatable, along with many of the practices. I started implementing some things in gaming, and I moved into tea partly for this reason. Later at Prep and Needles, I continued implementing several things. Things like OKRs, recruiting approaches, and many other practices I implemented as well. While working in gaming, I was also fortunate to work on Glenn Elliott's team, who built the total reward system at Google. He's a legendary figure. He worked at HP, Tesla, Google, and Redford. He even launched the practice of salary reviews there. So working with him, I got to directly engage with Google's ideas. I rely on best practices in my work, and I recommend you follow them too. Before we continue, I'd be very grateful if you could share what positions you hold. That's also very interesting. So if it's not too much trouble, please write your job title in the chat. To briefly summarize this course, there will be homework assignments. We'll have the first one today. Completing the homework will allow you to earn a diploma from our academy. It's issued in an online format, but you can also download it as a PDF. Okay, I see the first response is HR Director. Excellent. HR. Great. The course program itself covers the main areas, 8 sessions on 8 different topics where we study Google's practices. Today, we're talking about recruiting. Now, I'll tell you about my fascination with Google. It was probably something significant that caught my attention. It was actually the publication of the first pictures. This was in 2008. All these pictures are still available online. We can use a filter for the publication date of information on Google. You may remember seeing such pictures too. You can see they're even still low quality. It's clear it was 2008. There were no iPhone 15s. DSLRs weren't great. So even the photo quality isn't the best, but when working at Alpha Bank, I saw what offices could be like. I fell in love with the idea of this culture and approach to employees. It's not just about the interior or the office itself. Behind all this, as Google's founders say, is their attitude towards employees. Above all, it's about a special attitude towards employees, a unique culture, and then the practices that stem from it. This really impressed me tremendously in 2008. Then in 2008, I visited the global company office. It's an IT company. It was an IT outsourcing firm. I think they're still doing the same thing now. But in Kyiv, it was the first company to create an office based on the same principles as Google. I first went there in 2008. It was a very, very long time ago, so you understand, and companies were different back then. It was the first time I saw employees riding scooters around the office. I saw a ping pong table, some aquariums at the reception, all sorts of fun things, entertainment, PlayStation, and other stuff like that. When I came to the STB TV channel, I realized that media companies also have every chance to build a similar work environment. I even convinced the management to go on a tour of Global Logic to see how cool it was, so that we could start doing something similar too, and I was able to start recreating it. I'll show you pictures later of something similar and the attitude towards employees. The attitude at the channel wasn't bad in principle, but it wasn't very evident. In the 4.5 years I worked at the TV station, I was able to transform that attitude into real, tangible things, both physical and practical. In 2014, I was introduced to the OKR system and realized it was the future, that this is how you should set goals and manage performance. Then I moved to wargaming, and there I became even more immersed in a Google-like culture. In 2015, I read the book Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, which basically showed all their practices, and I started implementing many things in 2017 when I joined Preply. A lot of things fell into place. We fully implemented the system for the first time and made goals accessible to absolutely everyone. It was as transparent as Google. It was very unusual, even for 2018, and when we interviewed people from different top companies, they were surprised at how people in the company knew each other's goals, how everything was so transparent. Then I was asked to essentially build the same thing that I had built at Preply, with many similar recruiting practices as well. In 2019, I was able to visit Google's campus and see firsthand how the company treats employees, what it looks like from the outside, what's happening on the ground, and so on. Well, since 2017, when I started teaching online courses, I immediately began implementing all the best practices and teaching others about them as well. So indeed, these are good practices to learn from. And this year we are launching an HR like Google course. Here are the very screenshots I showed. This is the Global Logic company with popcorn machines, a gym, and even a trampoline, mind you. This was in 2008. Foosball table, not everything fit in the picture. It was something out of this world because all offices were rather dull, boring, monotonous walls, faded colors, some kind of tile on the floor. But here there was carpeting. It was so cheerful. And this is how I set up the recruiting department and HR department at the STB TV channel. It was a very interesting story too. At STB, they always painted the walls in a pale peach color and a barely noticeable yellow. Then, impressed by Global Logic's office, I think the pictures here look visually similar. I approached the administrative director and said, Mikhail Alexandrovich, the recruiters and I want to paint our walls in different colors. Those were the channel's corporate colors. We chose colors that matched the gradient: red, orange, yellow, and even burgundy. Are you out of your mind? You won't want to work there. I said, I guarantee you we will. No one will want to move in there after you. I said, we don't plan on moving. We've set up everything for ourselves there, meeting rooms. You'll want to repaint it. And I said, well, I won't. But if you want, we'll repaint at your expense. We agreed. We painted the walls in different colors, and everyone who came to our department at the TV channel was just shocked. Wow, you could do that? How cool, how awesome. And when candidates started coming in, they began to see that they had really come to a TV station because everything was colorful. They really liked the interior and they were in a positive mood. And these are photos from my visit to the Google campus. Yes, they have a famous alley of these Android versions. Different sweets, I mean. They name Android versions after different candies. There's a famous bicycle where many people can ride at the same time, and many other things. They even have that bike in the Intern movie. Everything is very special. I only thought to take pictures later. At first, I saw people playing beach soccer there. I mean, they have sand poured there, there's a net. And people are playing beach soccer, just having fun. And this was in February. It was warm during the day and cold in the evening. So very cool. Why? Final arguments. Why I'm learning from Google. I love it. I take examples and I advise others, and I advise you too. First of all, this company is recognized as the best employer by a huge number of portals and RT, Universum, and all sorts of others, and even Forbes, such a world-renowned magazine. has named Google the best employer in more than 15 countries for many years. I think it's not without reason. Since it's the best employer, it means their practices are better too. According to LinkedIn, Google is the company most people in the world want to work for. They see it all from the inside too. What people respond to, what they're interested in. That is, Google is the company that attracts the most interest as an employer. By the way, our chat here is anonymous since this is an open session, so no trolls can spam anything, so no one but me will see it. Please rate on a 10-point scale. I won't name names, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how much would you like to work at Google? Write it out carefully. I held that number as a 10 for myself for a very long time. I mean, it's always been cool to me. I even visited Google's office in Ukraine. I was looking at what it looks like too, but it's a very small office there. It's not quite the same Google. It's more focused on marketing and sales. But still, it was interesting to me. Looking at your ratings, 6, 10, 5, and Google actually receives over 2 million resumes every year. That's about 1 resume per minute by my calculation. I mean, that's a lot. This again demonstrates the interest in this company. Google employees recommend over 100,000 candidates each year. That's a lot too. Look at how loyal the employees are that they're willing to recommend so many candidates. This year marks the 25th anniversary. So Julia, who gave herself a 0, writes that most IT people want to work at Google. Yes, absolutely. So in 25 years, they've built the best HR system in the world. 160,000 employees work at Google alone, and you know Google is part of the Alphabet ecosystem, which also includes YouTube and many other projects, but Google is still the largest. In total, there are about 190,000 employees across all their businesses, with 160,000 at Google. Google has 4,500 HR employees. This data is from LinkedIn. It's very easy to check. Just select Google as the current employer, choose HR as the functional area, and you'll see how many. That's about 35 employees per HR person. It's a very low ratio because many companies have just 1 HR person per 100 employees. And half of those 4,500 people are involved in recruiting in one way or another, which is quite a lot. The company, they're called the official one. Google has been constantly growing, except that this year there were layoffs worldwide. All tech companies went through downsizing, and Google had it too. I think they're going to make up for that now with new directions in artificial intelligence and many others, and they have room to grow. But look, they've been constantly growing since 2012. This is just a small dip. It's been constant growth. And when a company grows, I know from experience because when I worked at STB TV channel and joined, there were 700 people. 4 years later, we already had 2,500. When a company grows, there are big needs and demands on HR practices. Google is also among the world's most valuable brands. In addition to being at the top in terms of market cap, Google's brand value is second only to Apple. What's interesting? Google has a very specific culture. It generally influences all areas. For example, something that might surprise you is that executives at Google can't make certain decisions on their own. Who to hire, who to fire, how to evaluate an employee's performance, how much to raise salaries, and what stock package bonuses to award employees, who to give awards for excellent leadership, who to promote, when to merge code of acceptable quality, when to determine the final product design and its market launch time. That is, many decisions are made by teams, not by managers. This is specific to Google, which tries to build a system where people are autonomous, people have authority, and managers act more like coaches. They mostly help. Interestingly, Google today is indeed a well-funded company, an expensive company, a large company, but it wasn't always like that. They built most of their processes and practices when they were quite a poor company, so it's not a matter of money. In the early stages, Google didn't have money either, absolutely. They were a startup. They existed for a long time without advertising. They didn't start making money right away. And for a long time, they had no profits and paid the lowest wages in the industry. Even almost 12 years after founding, many people still agreed to work at Google for less pay than they were getting before. And this persists to this day. Google still pays well, but there are companies that pay more. So what Google has done is not a matter of money, not a matter of them having huge amounts of money. Many practices are essentially free. You can implement them without money. It's more a question of culture and how they structure their work, how they build their practices. Of course, the founders play a huge role at Google. That's Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They managed the company for a long time. A few years ago, they stepped back from direct management. They hired a CEO, but for a long time, they personally ran the company. They always strive to create a company where work would be meaningful. Employees would be free to pursue their passions and feel that they and their families were cared for. Remember, they were one of the first to implement the 20% principle. You can spend 20% of your work time doing what you enjoy most. And from the investor's message. When Google went public, Larry Page and Sergey Brin wrote this investor message. Here's what they said. In this message, they essentially conveyed their attitude towards employees, which they have maintained to this day. Let's take a look together. So our employees mean everything to us, and they call themselves Googlers. Google is a company that, at its core, relies on its ability to attract and leverage the talents of outstanding business and technology specialists. We're fortunate to have so many true stars among our employees who embody high principles, a strong work ethic, and creativity. And we hope there will be even more in the future. We will take care of them and reward their efforts. And here's another very interesting continuation. We provide employees with many unconventional benefits, including free meals, healthcare, and laundry services. And we carefully evaluate the long-term benefits the company receives from this. So rest assured, we will continue to expand benefits, not cut them. We believe it's short-sighted to be stingy with things that allow staff to save significant time, improve their health, and increase productivity. Our employees are company owners. Indeed, they give out many stock options. That's why Google is what it is today. Thanks to our talented workforce, the company is achieving brilliant success in virtually every area of information technology. Our main advantages are the jobs and important projects that allow our employees to contribute and grow as professionals. Our overarching goal is to create an organization where talented, hardworking people are rewarded for their contributions to Google and the world they make better. And this really translates into everything. What is Google's main rule? They believe, and that's why their percentage of internal referrals sometimes reaches 50% of all sources for filling vacancies. So they've basically been growing because of this all along. Now, of course, when the company is huge, it's more difficult, but for a long time it was exactly like that. They believe that employees are the most important priority of any organization. At the same time, they know that you can't hire mediocre people and then make them better through training. They say that many companies try to hire average employees and then make them better through active training, but it doesn't work. They believe it's better to invest more money in hiring and save on training. And Google has long spent twice as much money on hiring as on training. That is, for example, in other companies, training costs are higher than hiring costs, while at Google it's the opposite. How Google's recruiting system is structured. So you need to understand the context. When Google started hiring, there were already other leading companies where everyone wanted to work, which offered a lot of money. That is, Google was little known. It was some small startup that wanted something. At that time, there were companies like Yahoo, InfoSeek, AltaVista, and Microsoft, and Google needed to find its own approach to compete among the giants at the time and attract the best talented employees. The first rule they adopted and have followed for a long time is never rush a search. They explicitly say hire slower. That is, they believe in interviewing and considering as many candidates as possible. And we've been building this story since we started with Preply and then continued. So we had an internal standard. About 3 candidates should be at the beginning of the funnel so that we could confidently assure ourselves that there were enough candidates. If few candidates were considered for a position, that's not enough. The second hiring rule is to only hire those who are better than you. This means the hiring manager, when interviewing someone, must find something in the person that is better than their own abilities. It's a great rule, and I've practiced it myself for a long time. I mean, I've always tried to hire people who are better at something. It could be communication, Excel skills, English proficiency, charisma, or something else. Something has to be better. You need to really acknowledge it. This person is truly better than me at this. At the same time, hiring managers don't make hiring decisions by themselves. The decision is made by a committee, and this practice is popular in many companies too. At Amazon, for example, they have a position, a role called bar raiser. This is a kind of tough person from another department who interviews the candidate very critically. And if they see that the candidate isn't very good, they reject them. The same thing works at Google. The same thing, less formally, was in gaming, more formally in Preply. That is, the hiring decision was always made by a group of people, the founder and director in my role and BD. It was already the founder, who was also the CEO, CFO, and directors, including myself. And it works when executives themselves don't make the decision alone. Why has Google stripped hiring managers of such authority? When a manager who needs an employee starts to rush, when they're already short-staffed and deadlines are approaching, they start lowering the bar? Yes, at Alexander's company, it applies to positions at all levels, absolutely. At all levels. That is, when in a hurry, they lower the bar. And that's bad because sooner or later compromises are made. Also, executives sometimes have a tendency to hire someone they know in order to do a favor for someone else. That could be their own boss, or someone in the company, or some external partners, or even friends, and that's bad too. This kind of hiring, when managers hire people themselves, also gives these managers a lot of power over employees. That is, employees feel indebted to the managers who hired them. I'll remind you that Google aims to minimize manager power so that managers aren't sole leaders, to create more of a horizontal structure. As a result, Google's hiring conversion rate from received resumes is 0%. That's one hire per 400 candidates. We were building about the same process, and I'll tell you it's a great conversion rate. In other words, until you have about 3,400 candidates at the top of your funnel, you haven't reviewed their profiles with your own eyes, haven't made 30 to 45 screening calls. After that, 10, 20, 30 initial interviews, possibly a test assignment, 5 to 10 final interviews, and ending up with 3 worthy candidates from which you choose the best. You won't be able to hire great people. When I was there, I was very interested to see that in the company, at least by the time I joined, the team was striving to hire well. Although I was told they had a situation where they got another round of investment and quickly hired 25 people, everything just broke down stupidly. Like there were 25 of them, they hired 25 more, and everything stopped working. So there was a lot of apprehension there. And they hired me to help them double in size again, but without breaking anything. And it worked out. And when I arrived, there wasn't really a hiring process in place. There was one freelance recruiter. She mostly worked with active candidates who sent resumes themselves. There was minimal interviewing, and they hired whoever was ready to start working. Then the company grew, moved to a new office, started making more money, and the CEO decided to revamp the hiring system. He brought me in, I formed a team. And when we started bringing him candidates of a fundamentally different caliber, he realized how great it was and started hiring the best of the best. Next, Google's early work with recruiting companies was not successful. I mean, they tried when they were making their first hires and growing to their first few thousand employees. They tried working with recruiting companies, agreed only to pay per hire with no retainer, conducted many interviews with candidates because for one candidate there were many interviews, rejected 99% of candidates, offered salaries lower than what candidates were currently making because they weren't willing to overpay. So in their case, recruiting companies didn't work. They'll return to them later. When the company, as it is now with 160,000 employees, it's inevitable that recruitment companies will be used somewhere. Google is known for their unusual approaches. You can often see examples of how Google once published an unusual job ad where the website address was the solution to a formula, and there was a sequence of different solutions. But interestingly, it attracted a lot of attention. A lot of media wrote about them, but in the end, they didn't hire anyone. And Google is known for many such unconventional approaches, including what we'll be talking about in the next class, including questions like, if you were shrunk and found yourself in a blender, what would you do? That didn't produce results either. Google abandoned that too. That is, what they did in the end was come up with systematic solutions in hiring, assessment, and many other areas. Google also has its own requirements for candidates. They're not looking specifically for professionals with big-name companies on their resumes. That's not their approach at all. What's more important to them is what kind of people they are, how humble they are, how conscientious they are, leadership, and googliness. Again, we'll have a more detailed assessment in the next class. Google also spent a long time selecting candidates with top degrees from top universities, but then realized it was complete nonsense because what kind of education you have doesn't really matter that much. And in general, even some people who didn't finish university could still become excellent specialists. I mean, at some early stage, they were so hung up on this that they even asked people for their SAT test results, Scholastic Aptitude Test. They asked people for their high school exam grades, if available, in their college diploma supplements. But then they realized that was all nonsense too. That is, when they did a big analysis of who they were hiring and how they were hiring, they realized that how well a person did in school had no effect at all on how they would perform 2 or 3 years after graduation. So they stopped requiring it. The only thing is that they continued to select students based on their academic success, because when you're selecting students, at least there's some kind of filter there. Next, they have been and are very active in using algorithms and data in recruiting. Next, they've been and still are very actively using algorithms and data in recruiting. By the way, they developed their own GHR system, and they even tried to roll it out and make it their own ATS. We even tried it at Play. I talked to them about it. The system was very raw, to put it mildly. This was in 2018 or even 2017. And I was talking to some product manager in the US because we were one of the first beta testers. But even then, it was already falling behind competitors. In the end, it didn't survive, and they shut it down 3 years later. That is, they retired it, as they call it. But internally, they use such algorithms quite well. They developed a system to compare resumes with Google profiles. And the system would find people who had studied or worked together and ask them for a recommendation for the candidate. But it's a cool system when you have the ability to develop these kinds of things in-house. That's cool. How did they interview the recruits? In the 2000s, they asked any questions without structure. There was no coordination between interviewers. Some questions were missed, and candidates were invited for a second interview just to assess something else that had been forgotten earlier. This created a bad experience and negative reviews, and around 2003, 2004, there were a lot of reviews on the internet about how arrogant everyone at Google was, how little respect they had for people, what a horrible interview experience it was. They had to work on that. Recruiting took half a year or more. They say up to a year and a half. Even when I was working at Play, it was 2017. One of the co-founders said that he had been interviewing with Google for so long that he managed to start his own startup, and the startup got investment and started showing results. If they hadn't taken so long to interview me, I'd be working at Google as some developer and wouldn't be a founder. But since it dragged on for more than a year, when they called again, I said, well, probably not anymore. I'm already in a startup. A candidate could go through 15 to 25 interviews, and history knows of records of up to 40 interviews. Imagine the patience it takes, and a great many hours of time were spent by the employees involved in the interviews themselves on interviewing and writing reports. It came to 250 hours for one hire. That's how much effort they put into it. Part of the reason it worked was because they were very afraid, and that's what I really like about it. And it's something that all startups and companies that haven't yet become a systematic organization of thousands of people definitely need to do. When you're a small company, you've got 30, 40, 50, up to 100 people. It's very important to be afraid of making wrong hires. Because one wrong hire is very expensive, it's missed opportunities, it impacts everyone else. So Google was willing to even let 2 good candidates go through this lengthy process, as long as the system eliminated one bad one. And they were really very afraid that they would hire the wrong person, someone toxic or unsuitable among the first employees. And I agree with them on that. Often companies hire their first employees very quickly, poorly, and this often ruins companies. So these first hires need to be done super slowly, super carefully, very cautiously. No matter how fast you want to do it, Google found their way. You can see what the backstory was. Strong competitor, low salaries, and they didn't have a cool office at first, long process. So they found their source of recruitment. They saw that the best hires came from their current employees recommending other employees. For a long time, up to 50% of their hires came from referrals. In 2009, however, recommendations started to decrease, and they increased the bonus from $2,000 to $4,000 per hire. Nothing changed because it wasn't about the money. Everyone loved Google. Everyone was willing to recommend Google, but Google hired so few candidates, only 5%, including those that employees recommended, that many people simply stopped believing that it worked at all. What did they do? They introduced a set of rules. These are great rules. They were recreated at Wargaming and Work. All recommended candidates must be contacted within 48 hours without fail. The person who made the recommendation receives a weekly status update on what's happening with their referral. They also changed the format of their work and started asking employees questions differently to encourage recommendations. Because often we just send out a vacancy and wait for recommendations. Instead, they started asking who the best professional is among those you've ever worked with. This is a nudging question that makes you not just think about whether you know someone or not, but look at the situation differently. Plus, they implemented a practice of active recommendations or forced recommendations. I call it the forced recommendation method. When they started gathering 20 to 30 people, and sometimes it was done individually for those in the same profession, they started looking through these people's social networks to find professionals they knew and asked which of these people they would recommend. So these were like brainstorming sessions. What are the recruiting priorities at Google? finding those who aren't actively looking for a job themselves. They realize that the best employees are often not the most active job seekers. Active use of LinkedIn. And now that's the #1 resume database. It's approaching 1 billion users, so I think that's really the case. They started using what they call the known universe method, implying that basically you can count and identify all the people in the market. They started mapping candidates. This is called T-mapping or mapping when they set certain requirements and find people for them through LinkedIn and other sources, meaning they identify all possible candidates and then try to evaluate and contact them. It's called mapping. So we're saying that these 10 companies suit us. We're looking for front-end developers with these skills. The sourcing team scoured LinkedIn, GitHub, and other platforms. They got a list of names, looked at profiles, evaluated, selected, and then made contact. They also asked Googlers to review lists of people they've created during the mapping process to analyze who might be a good fit. Recruiters make the first contacts, but engineers and managers are often involved. They build long-term relationships overall, understanding that if someone isn't open to new opportunities today, they might be looking for a job in a year or two, and there will already be a warm contact. They have many cases where individual executives negotiated with top specialists for 4 to 10 years until they agreed to join the company. Overall, this is a long-term relationship building strategy, and it works really well. Google also concluded that one of their best sources is their career site. Right now, the main focus is on their career site. They've built a really cool site. There's going to be a link here. They've even built a separate website to describe their benefits. And all the latest job openings are published there first. On the same site, they've created some really cool employee stories to convey the company culture. They recorded short videos. I'd recommend you watch those as well. This is what the website looks like. They even have a detailed selection process described on their website. We will specifically cover candidate assessment in the next session. We will look at it in detail. They have a very interesting system for how they select candidates. Job descriptions. Theirs are relatively simple, actually. It is very interesting because it is very popular right now to create cool job descriptions, but they do not emphasize that. They emphasize the fact that they are a well-known brand. They focus on their cool website and social media. In the job posting itself, they just formally provide information about the position. They publish minimum requirements, desired requirements, role descriptions, often indicate compensation and responsibilities. For example, I'm not going to read it out. There will be an example here. Minimum qualifications, a list. Desired requirements. I like this one. It is always recommended to students to divide it like this too. Write this as the basics, and this is what we would ideally like to have. But they describe the role really well. They have a list of responsibilities, but they communicate the essence of the role in a cool storytelling format. That seems to be their main selling point. And they address the employee, describing a vision of the future work. That is something to learn from, exactly how the role is described. In the job description, they list the salary. That is pretty interesting too. Average for Silicon Valley. I looked at a software developer position, but it does not specify a range. I would not say it is a super big salary for Silicon Valley. This is, I believe, in Silicon Valley and the responsibilities. Basically, they describe the duties very briefly. Where do they use recruiting agencies now? They use recruiting agencies. First, in new countries where they simply don't know the local market. And when there's a need for confidentiality, that is to contact people who are afraid to interact directly with Google and would be more willing to communicate with some recruiting agency, which will then reveal that it's Google looking. However, they never choose agencies based on names, but look at specific consultants. They say what's more important to them is which consultants work with them, not how prestigious the agency is. That's the right strategy. I've always done that. I always ask to be shown the consultants we would be working with and to talk to them. What about job boards? Interestingly, at first they used job boards like Monster, Career Builder, and Indeed. Then they stopped posting. But for a company like Google with 160,000 people and 3,000 job openings, even during a downturn, post layoffs, it's impossible not to use them, so they resumed. Where are they looking now currently? They rely on referrals, of course. Employee referrals are a priority channel for them. They work with university campuses. Yes, they need a lot of juniors, a lot of interns, and they're actively doing this. They post jobs on LinkedIn, they have some jobs on Glassdoor and Indeed, which are top global international platforms. They host all kinds of networking events and participate in conferences. For example, I was at a conference in San Jose and they were there. They offer their usual products there and talk about job openings. They bring in recruiting agencies and hold all kinds of coding competitions like hackathons to attract the most talented people. And they have various training projects from which they also make offers. The topic of training at Google is also big. We won't talk about it. They have free courses, they have accelerators, they have mentors, and all of this contributes to their hiring process as well. Interestingly, Google conducts very structured interviews. Initially, their interviews were chaotic, but they quickly realized that people often form opinions about candidates within the first 10 seconds. So they developed an excellent evaluation system that helps them avoid mistakes. They also have a great social media presence. Continuing on the recruitment theme, but more from an employer branding perspective, I'd still recommend checking it out. They're on Facebook with fresh, cool videos from various events. Their recruiters record these videos, which is really great. They're on LinkedIn, where they post their job openings. There are 2,720 vacancies listed there. It's clear that's their main channel. They're on YouTube too. Check out what they post. How we hire at Google, resume tips, interview advice. By the way, they've been conducting various masterclasses, webinars, and training sessions for a long time on how to interview effectively and how Google conducts interviews. They're happy to help people learn how to do this more effectively. They even have resume improvement tips on their website. They're on Twitter, of course. If we look at their recent posts, they're quite diverse. They clearly put effort into their social media presence. And they're on Instagram, where they have Reels. Instagram has its own format with more videos and pictures. I'd recommend checking that out as well. Now for the homework, for those of you taking the course with us, first, follow Google's social media accounts that I've shown you to stay updated on their practices. Look at their recent posts, see what they're talking and writing about. Considering what we've discussed today, this presentation, and what you'll see in their posts and possibly on their websites, describe 5 ideas your company could implement, similar to what Google does. That's all for today. Next, we'll discuss how Google evaluates employee selection. Then we'll talk about how they onboard, manage performance, evaluate, conduct performance reviews and OKRs. You can submit your homework through your personal account. We'll have a session about their unique corporate culture, how they work on engagement, and how they manage change and innovation, and of course, HR analytics. They pay a lot of attention to this issue. We'll discuss that too. That's it. Thank you all for your attention. Once again, I invite you to join our course to learn about the best practices of truly the best company according to various employer rankings, to build something similar for yourself. Because when something great has worked for others, and we apply it correctly and sensibly to our own situation, we can also expect good results. That's what it's for. It's important to be able to recognize good practices, but not just copy them. You need to understand them. Today we discussed many things and why they do them that way. Why do they hire slowly? Because if you start hiring slowly without understanding why, it's wrong. If you understand that you're doing this to avoid hiring a toxic employee, when you understand what you're doing. So understanding is crucial here, and that's what we discuss in this course. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks to those who were online. See you soon, and I look forward to seeing you in the course. Bye-bye.